Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Last night, I shared with you details of a review by an anonymous writer, a British journalist in the Times of London. It's dated December 15th, 1862, and it's a commentary on photography in America, Civil War photography in America. This writer has received volumes of photographs from the States, including war scenes and portraits. And the opportunity here is to take a look at these images and then comment on them. In last night's video, I gave you the beginning part where the reviewer talks about the origins of war photography, beginning with Roger Fenton and the Crimea, up to the modern times, which is Abraham Lincoln, Jefferson Davis, George B. McClellan, Robert E. Lee, and all the political and military leaders active in the latter part of 1862. I want to share the section of the review where this writer basically tears into some of these individuals. And as you're going to find out, it's not very subtle where his or her loyalties are. Whoever this writer is, definitely pro-Southern. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of this review, the commentary on the political and military leaders. So here we go. Turning to the volume of portraits, the eye is first arrested by Mr. Lincoln, sitting in company with an ink bottle at a table which does not conceal that foot which he is so often said by the papers to put down on various questions. That's this photograph. An odd, quaint face, sagacious notwithstanding the receding brow, and kindly despite the coarse, heavy-lipped mouth, but with such capillary arrangements that, in combination with the long-limbed narrow body and the great extremities, there is a gorilla expression produced by the ensemble. Next is Hannibal Hamlin, Vice President, who is chiefly interesting on account of what he might become. Turn over the page, and Mr. Stanton gives a sitting for his head alone, the lines of which do not stand comparison very well with the keen, clear outline of Mr. Seward's features next to it. Why did not Mr. Brady give the full face of Mr. Seward so that one could see his eye? In other respects, the likeness, though it does not convey that air of cunning and conceit which Prince Napoleon's attaché attributed in his feuilleton to the Secretary of State, is characteristic and true. Pass over Mr. Bates, and we come to Mr. Chase, who is standing with one hand outside his coat, over his breeches pocket, and the other on a plaster of Paris pedestal, looking as though he were waiting for someone to lend him a little money, and expecting it too. He has one of the best heads among the cabinet, though one cannot help remarking he has a defect in his eyes, and oddly enough, so has General Butler, and so has Mr. Jefferson Davis. It is not too much to say that any stranger would be struck by the immense superiority of the heads and the expression of Mr. Davis, of General Polk, of Beauregard, of Stonewall Jackson and Lee to most of the Federal chiefs, of whom few are at all striking in any way. I told you, pro-Southern. McClellan looks small and anxious and unhappy. Blenker stands like a soldier and has the air of being one, and Burnside seems calm and self-possessed and capable. Halleck's head is an intellectual one, but the face is dreamy and the lower jaw feeble. John Pope, a stout, florid, sanguine-looking man, is like a German bass singer in fine condition. And there is no other to speak of, excepting perhaps Marr, Thomas Francis, and Irvin McDowell in the list of soldiers worth looking at a second time after we have passed Nathaniel Banks, the unhappy recipient of Stonewall Jackson's favors. The few naval men in the book contrast advantageously with many of the soldiers, but some of the best of the latter are not here. Stonewall Jackson's likeness is something like that of a remarkable head, but without the beetle brows, shaggy and overhanging the full eye attributed to him. From the Confederate soldiers, there is but the thickness of a cardboard to the Federal journalists, of whom the most remarkable thing is that they all seem to be above the age for liability to conscription. Literary men follow a group of the clergy, and the fine faces of Longfellow and Motley are among the best in the collection. Jefferson Davis, who comes after a batch of federal politicians, is back to back with Gerrit Smith, and Mr. Stevens, the vice president of the Southern Confederacy, supports Mr. Charles Sumner. These are the pages as we're going through the book. The portrait of Chief Justice Taney attracts one not merely on account of the air of the venerable old man, but because it is the likeness of the judge who will, in all probability, prove the last that ever sat on the bench as head of the Supreme Courts of the United States, and in whose person was signally demonstrated the complete worthlessness of that boasted palladium of the American Constitution when the storm arose and the sword was unsheathed by the violent and unscrupulous men. Place aux dames. In the photograph of Mrs. Lincoln, the loyalty and skill of Mr. Brady are as conspicuous as his gallantry in adapting the focus to the subject. Unkind. But he has treated the wife of the president, who is, of course, the first lady in the United States, much better than he has Miss Lane, that's Harriet Lane, who did the honors of the White House for President Buchanan and who won such praise for her discharge of them. The women's portraits, which are almost at the end of the volume, are not many. So there you have it. An anonymous British reviewer writing in the London Times, December 15th, 1862, letting it all hang out, talking smack about the Union politicians and generals compared to the Confederate counterparts. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the trail.